So I want to introduce our next speaker. His name is Mark Borax. Mark is a soul-level astrologer, author and headmaster of the College of Visionaries and Wizards. And his talk is about how his first acid trip at a traffic concert in 1970 changed his life. Please welcome Mark Borax.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm sitting here in Vermont and I'm going to talk about how my first acid trip at a traffic concert in 1970 changed my life. I was living in Stratford, Connecticut, and I had been smoking pot for a year. Of course, we'd all heard about acid in those days, and I thought about it a lot, but I hadn't taken any. And a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to go see the band Traffic play at the Capitol Theater in Portchester, New York, which is a very famous rock and roll theater, an old opera house type venue. And I hadn't gone to any major concerts then and hadn't dropped acid. And for some reason, I thought I really wanted to make this experience. I wanted to be sure that I got whatever I needed to get out of it. So instead of taking one tab, I took two, and it was called yellow barrel acid, and it was each of the tabs was about the size of a quarter, and little did I know what I was getting myself in for. But I, along with half of the people in my car, there were six of us, and half of us dropped the acid and half of us didn't. And then we drove from Stratford, Connecticut to Portchester, New York, which was a little more than an hour's drive. And as we got out of the car and were outside the theater, my hands started glowing. And I just want to point out that in general, the acid from the early 1970s was about 10 times stronger than the acid nowadays. And so, basically this would probably be like taking 20 hits of today's acid, what I did at that point. And my hands started glowing. My left hand started glowing pinkish, and my right hand started glowing this bluish green color, and they got brighter and brighter. And then they shot out rays, a pink ray and a blue ray shot out of my hands up to the outside of the theater. And the rays came together at the outside of the theater and exploded in these multicolored rainbow sparkles that showered over the crowd. And I started walking around and dusting off people's sparks, people's shoulders. And nobody thought it was too weird, because a lot of them were probably tripping or stoned. And 1970 was still pretty much like the 1960s were in a lot of ways. And this was Halloween. It was the night before Halloween, and in many traditions, that's the night when the veil between the worlds is thinnest. And we weren't quite in Halloween yet, but the concert ended up going so late that we crossed over into Halloween, early Halloween morning. We went into the concert, and I was sitting there watching the colored lights just moving around, and I was completely transported to another dimension. And there were a couple of opening acts before Traffic came out, and they played the John Barleycorn Must Die album, which some of you may know, has songs like Freedom Rider and Glad, Every Mother's Son, Empty Pages, John Barleycorn Must Die. And they had Stevie Winwood, who co-wrote those songs, singing, playing guitar and keyboards, and Chris Wood playing the flute. And I was just transported. I was just sent on this shamanic journey through the music. Even today, whenever I hear those songs, it all comes back again, because it was such a powerful experience. And when the concert ended, it was, it was well after midnight, late in the night, and I was tripping my brains out. I was just flying. The music, the colored lights, the acid. And by the time I was dropped off at, me and my girlfriend were dropped off at her parents' house back in Stratford, Connecticut, I was tripping violently, just hallucinations, colors, trails, traces, echoes. And I began to get afraid that I might never be normal again. I was so far into the music, into the colors, into the experience, into the acid. She had to go into her bedroom to go to sleep, and I was laying down on the couch, but there was absolutely no way I was going to sleep. It turned out that I wasn't able to sleep for the next 2 nights. So that night I didn't sleep. The next night I didn't sleep. The night after that I didn't sleep, because I was just still not like vividly hallucinating, but still tripping, still in an altered state, and trying to adjust to normal life in Stratford, Connecticut, which had always felt very conventional and imprisoning to me. A few months later, when the summertime came and I was still 16 years old, I hitchhiked to California, just because I wanted to bust out. The acid experience, along with the band Traffic, which Traffic was at least 50% responsible for sponsoring my first journey across dimensions that way. It wasn't just the LSD, though that was very powerful acid. My friends that night who only took 1 tab said they just tripped their brains out. They just kept going and going and going. And but it really wasn't the acid alone by itself. It was Traffic and the way that they make their music and the way that they guided me. They became like my shamanic guides from one dimension into another. And back in Stratford, as I was coming down from the acid, I was wanting to remember very strongly. I was wanting to capture what had happened, because I knew that I had been introduced, or a better word might be thrust. I knew that I had been thrust out of the normal dimension, the normal white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Stratford, Connecticut, 1970 universe. And I knew that in some ways I was never going to go back again. I was never going to be the same. But I was glad that the hold that the acid had over me physiologically and psychically was releasing, and I realized I was going to probably be normal again. I wasn't going to always be in this incredibly powerful state that was flying. But the music was still moving through me even long after the concert. And I realized that life and the universe were something incredibly different than I had known, than I had been told. Even though by 1970, I'd read a lot about acid and and the music of the late 60s and the early 70s was very infused with entheogenic experiences, and just to be alive at that time, and the music that was coming out would take you on a trip. The Moody Blues would take you on a trip. The Beatles would take you on a trip. Traffic would definitely take you on a trip. Even though I had known that, it was a much different experience, especially at 16 years old. And I had just turned 16 to actually go on that journey. And my main experience was, oh my God, this is life. This is music. This is me. This is the universe. This is traffic. These are these songs. Well, I only ever saw Traffic one more time after that. And it was in 1990s, in the early 1990s. And so little more than 20 years had passed. And it was in California. I saw them in an outdoor show in the Bay Area. And they were selling really nicely printed pamphlets of the history of the band. And I read that Traffic all lived together in a house in the country in England. And the way that they made their songs was they all dropped acid and jammed for days and nights on end without sleeping. And they kept the tapes rolling through the entire jam. And when they came down from the acid, they would stop and they would go back and play the tapes, and they would listen to everything they had just created. And they'd pause at certain places and they'd say, okay, that's a song. And they would take a snapshot of this 5-minute or 10-minute or 15-minute section of the jam that had happened days before. And they would pull that out and they would polish the lyrics and polish the music. And that was how they created all their songs. This makes a lot of sense when you think about Traffic, even though they never called themselves this, as a fusion band, because they were one of the only bands, probably still today, one of the only bands that ever effortlessly crossed genres. So they played blues and classical and folk and jazz and rock and gospel and country. And yet they didn't jump up and down and say, look at us, everybody, we're fusion. They were just Traffic. But yet their ability to fuse all different kinds of music, so that each time they came out of the studio, they didn't just have an album, they came out with a genre. They just came out with something entirely new. This made a lot of sense to me in the early 1990s when I was reading the brochure the second time I saw Traffic. And I thought, oh my God, my first acid trip was sponsored by people who made music on their acid trips and just jammed and jammed and jammed. Now, I never saw Traffic again, but I did see Stevie Winwood play one more time. And this was a little more than 10 years ago in Boston. He was playing with his band. And my first book had just come out. It's called 2012, Crossing the Bridge to the Future. And it's the memoir of my 7-year apprenticeship to a wild wizard in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California, my adventures in astrology and love and sex. And I thought, I really want to get a copy of my book to Stevie Winwood, because he was so instrumental in opening my consciousness. I created soul level astrology in 1987. I don't look at the birth chart the way anyone else does. I use it as a window to the soul. And I wanted to give something back to Stevie Winwood. And there was about, I don't know, 50 people or more waiting outside the theater after his gig, waiting to get in. And for some reason, one of his friends came out and pointed to me and my wife and my son and said, you, and you, come here. And he opened the backstage door and he let us in. And we were the only ones who got in. And I got to meet Stevie Winwood. and spend 2 hours sitting with him on a couch backstage while his road crew broke down the stage set. And I got to give him my book and talk with him. And I said, Stevie, I just got to tell you, you know, your earlier concert with the John Barleycorn tour sponsored my first acid trip. And I read that you guys all used to live together in the house in the countryside in England and trip for days and nights on end and just jam. And that was how you made all your songs back in the day. And he looked at me and he said, that's still how we do it. And I just cracked up because, you know, now this was like, you know, 2009 or something. And I thought, right on, he's still doing it that way. And I want to play you a song that I wrote about coming down from that acid trip. I was driving along a road in my hometown, Stratford, Connecticut, called the Burma Road. And it's a long sweeping curve that goes through saltwater marshes with a lot of wildlife by the Long Island Sound. And so let me pick up my guitar and Lakshman, let me just play for a couple seconds. I want you to tell me if it's distorting or if it sounds right or anything. Don't touch that dial on the radio.
Seems all right to me.
Sounds okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Don't touch that dial on the radio. Otis is singing about roaming from his home. He's testifying about that killing kind of loneliness. Take me on down the Burma Road. Take me on down the Burma Road. I'm seeing colors now. It's my first view from the inside. Stevie Winwood's calling me to some sweet land of the soul. Take me on down the Burma Road. And I see white cranes and egrets hide like little gods in the grass. I see white cranes and egrets hide like little gods in the grass. And then they take me to the sky and show me everything shall pass. Long island breezes blow from the lordship side of the road. Take me on down the road. Touch that dial on the radio. Otis is singing about roaming from his home. He's testifying about that killing kind of loneliness. Take me on down the Burma Road. And I see a blue heron flying like jagged lightning. I see a great blue heron flying like jagged lightning, while the red-winged blackbirds fill the sky. Long island breezes blow. I'm coming home.
Wow. That is quite a story. I thank you for the song. That was so heartfelt and wonderful. It was a little jangled through the thing, but you know, we still got the spirit of it.
Okay.
So how did all this influence you're creating this school of wizards? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, even as a kid, I always knew that there was something more going on than they were telling us. I always knew my parents weren't who they seemed to be. It was like they'd forgotten the magic that I was feeling when I was 9 years old. And I made a vow. I made a vow when I was 9 years old that however old I get, I'm never going to forget the magic. I'm not gonna be like my parents and the teachers and adults. Somehow they forgot. And I don't know what happens to people between my age and their age, but whatever it is, it's not going to happen to me. And then that acid trip and the music of Traffic, just they sending me on that trip. I still haven't come back from that journey, and I'm still going. Then I bumped into this wild wizard in Santa Cruz, California, named Elias Lonsdale in 1987. And I became his apprentice for 7 years. He taught me a way to use the birth chart to get to the soul. And so I formed my own practice, soul level astrology, because I wanted a way to connect people to their core nature. And I know that sometimes entheogens can do that. I've had experiences in my life, in my teens, in my 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, with mushrooms, with acid, with ecstasy, even with edibles, pot brownies, and whatever, where my vision got like X-ray vision, and I could see through the way things appear into underlying dimensions. And I wanted a way to do that for other people. So that experience that I had at the Traffic concert indirectly led eventually to, I met Elias Lonsdale. I created my own version of astrology. I call it soul level astrology. And that's my way of helping people tear down their artificial selves, take off their mask, take off their costume, and get down to who they really are, why their soul is here. And so that's been my practice since 1987.
Thank you.